Amen. 2016, November 28th, was the best day of my life. I told my daughter this. I said, baby, what do you think? Why do you think November 28th, 2016 was the best day of my life? And she just laughed. She said, because I was born. I said, okay, fair enough. That is it. So 2016, November 28th was one of the best days in my life because I became a father for the first time. My wife and I became parents for the first time. Now, exactly a year later, 2017, November 28th, something incredible happened. It was my daughter's first birthday. We woke up early that morning, and because we were getting ready, preparing for her birthday, I was going to go and set up the marquees outside in the backyard and all that sort of thing. But before I did that, we just sat around in the lounge room. Now, my daughter has been holding on to things, trying to walk and all that sort of thing. This day, November 28th, 2017, we were sitting in the lounge room. I didn't have my phone with me. And my daughter just got up and took her step. And she started walking. Now, you're probably wondering, why is that a joy to you? First steps. Now, do you remember the first step that your son or your daughter took? Anyone? Yeah? It's a memorable event, isn't it? Because they no longer need to hold on to things. They are now independent. They can get up and start walking by themselves. Not quite do things for themselves. I wish they were able to do that at the time. Change their own nappies, but no. It was just walking. And I wish I had my camera because I wanted to recall that first part. Her first steps. Now, my second daughter, she didn't take that long to walk. She started walking at 9 months, I think, or less. But the next step was so crucial for my daughter because now she didn't need to hold on to the couch. She could walk. And what I want to talk to you about today is the power of your next step. The power of your next step. Now, I want to share with you 3 Bible characters and their next step that changed their lives. Okay, the first one, there's the vast tapestry of the Bible. Several remarkable individuals were known for their unique and intimate relationship with God because they walked closely with God. The first one I want to look at today is Moses. Now, Moses, as we all know, was a great leader. But we're going to pick up the story of Moses. I'm not going to tell the whole story of Moses. We're going to pick up the story of Moses. If you have your Bibles with you, go to Exodus chapter 3. Exodus chapter 3, and we'll pick up the story of Moses. So Moses had just run away. At this point, he's run away from Egypt where he grew up. He knew he'd done something wrong and he had to run away. So he was a fugitive. And he was out in a desert looking after his father-in-law Jethro's sheep. And out of nowhere, Moses notices there is something strange that's happening. And what's happening is that he's never seen it before, was that there was a fire that was on a bush, but it wasn't burning the bush. And Moses thought to himself, I want to see this up close and personal. I want to see what's happening here. Why is this so weird? Why isn't the bush burning? So Moses starts walking to the burning bush. If you have time, read the whole story because it's an incredible story. He starts walking to the bush. And he gets closer and closer and closer. And it says that God spoke out from the bush to Moses, and he says, Moses, he says, stop. Don't come any closer. Take your shoes off because the ground you're standing on is holy. So the steps of Moses, he was stepping because he wanted to get to know what was happening right there in the bush. As he was getting closer, God told him to stop. Before you take the next step, I want you to stop. And I want you to take off your shoes because the ground that you are standing on is holy ground. I've never spoken to a burning bush before. I've never seen a burning bush that wasn't burning. But Moses did. And as Moses was approaching this bush, God spoke to him and God opened his eyes because right there and then Moses received his calling. Moses received his next step. God told Moses to take off your shoes. Now, I've always wondered, why did God tell Moses to take off his shoes? Now, at this point, Moses was a fugitive. He was running from what he was fearful of. He was running away because he didn't want to get killed. He was running away because he knew if he set his foot back in Egypt, he'll be the first one to die. So he knew that was the load that Moses was carrying, and it was weighing him down. So when God saw Moses approaching, stepping towards the burning bush, God said, "Wait, Moses, stop. Take off your shoes." I've always wondered, why did God tell Moses to take off his shoes? This is not biblical, it's not in the Bible, but this is what my thinking is. God must have thought, Moses, in order for you, before you take your next step, I need you to take off the baggage that you are carrying. Before you can step into the calling that I'm calling you and the big picture that I'm about to share with you, before you do that, I need you to let go of whatever that is holding you back. I need you to let go of all the things that you are thinking through that is weighing you down and stopping you from taking the next step. Now, I don't know if there's anyone in here that's going through the same thing, that there's a calling on their lives, but they can't take the calling because there's something that's stopping them. God said to Moses, take off your shoes. Take off whatever is weighing you down, because you're in my presence. And when you are in my presence, Moses, you are a free man. When you are in my presence, Moses, you have a purpose. We talked about leaders this morning. It was really good. When you are in my presence, Moses, you have a common purpose. You have a common goal. And God starts giving him the big picture. Moses, now that you're standing there, nothing but you. No shoes, no baggages, just you and me. This is what I want you to do, Moses. I've heard the cry of my people, and I've come down to save them. And if you read the whole chapter, right into chapter 4 of Exodus, you'll find the conversation between God and Moses gets super exciting and interesting, because Moses starts unloading the burdens that he had. But God, I can't speak. He had a stutter. But God, what if the people said this? But God, what if this happens? But God. I can't do it. I can't go back into the presence of Pharaoh. And chapter 4, God says to Moses, Moses, after all your excuses, here's what I want you to do. What's your next step? Moses, I want you to identify what's in your hand. And God asked Moses, what's in your hand? And Moses said, hey, God, it's a piece of stick. It's a shepherd's staff. It's a dead piece of stick. I use this to move the sheep around. I use this to give them direction. I use this to let them know that they're doing the wrong thing, that they should come back. And God said to Moses, now that you know what it is, it's a dead piece of stick, I want you to throw it on the ground. And he does, and it becomes a living, breathing, moving serpent. And Moses was scared of that. And he moved away from it, and God said, pick it up again, Moses. So he picks it up from the tail, and it turns back into a staff. And this is a big picture that God wanted Moses to know. Moses, as long as you are holding on to that piece of stick, it will remain to be a dead piece of stick. But if you give it to me, I'll bring it to life. Give me everything that you have. The next step, Moses, that I want you to know, that I want you to take, is to trust me. Walk with me. Because as long as you're holding on to that thing in your hand, it will be a dead, useless piece of stick. But give it to me, and Moses, let's make something happen. So here's a thought for you. If you want to see God work in your life, give him what's in your hands. Don't hold on to it. Next step for Moses was seeing the big picture and giving God whatever it was in his hands for God to make it happen. The second person that I want to look at very quickly is Esther. Queen Esther. Beautiful Queen Esther, young lady of Jew heritage. That's what I was looking for. You know the story of Esther. I hope you do. She was this young, beautiful lady, and her name means star or hide, because she hid her identity from the king. And I love the conversation between Esther and her cousin Mordecai. That's where we're going to pick up the story. I'm not going to tell the whole story of Esther, but the story is that Mordecai noticed that there was a plan to destroy all the Jews. And he goes to Esther. He actually goes to the gate. And he cries, and Esther sends out her messenger and asks him, what was happening, Mordecai? What is happening? Why are you there? And let me read verse 14 onwards. This is what Mordecai said after Esther refused to see the king. He said to her, if you keep quiet at a time like this, deliverance and relief for the Jews will arise from some other place. But if you and your relatives will die, who knows if perhaps you were made queen for just such a time as this? Then Esther sent reply to Mordecai, go and gather together all the Jews of Susa and fast for me. Do not eat or drink for 3 days, nights and day. My mates and I will do the same, and then, though it is against the law, I will go in to see the king. If I must die, I must die. So Mordecai went away and did everything as Esther had ordered him to. So just a brief background to Esther. Yes, at this point in time, there was a degree that the Jews will be destroyed. And Mordecai, Esther's cousin or mentor, and this is so important because mentoring or having a mentor or someone that we can trust that can keep us accountable in life and give us direction is so important. Esther had Mordecai. And Mordecai was saying, Esther, you're the queen. Your next step is to save your people. But the queen could not go into the presence of the king without the king's permission. Even though she's a queen, the king had to give permission for her to enter. And if there's no permission to enter, the king has the right to kill her. And that's what Esther was afraid of. I don't have permission to go into the presence of the king, Mordecai. So how do you expect me to step into his presence without him giving me permission? And Mordecai said to her, this was not a guilt trip. This was empowerment. Mordecai said to her, Esther, maybe you were made queen for this very moment in time. Maybe you were made queen for a purpose. Maybe this is your calling, Esther. And with all the courage and the strength and the passion that Esther had, she understood. She understood her purpose. As a leader, as someone that has been called into a role that she was in, it was time to step up. And her next step was, Mordecai, I know that this could be very dangerous for me, but I'm going to go into the presence of the king. And if I die, I die. This was such a courageous woman who knew her purpose and what her next step was. So my question for us is, are we willing to die for what we believe in if we take our next step? The third person, my clock is telling me that I've got very little time. The last person I want to talk about today, and I'm going to spend a little bit of time because I find his character quite interesting, is Peter, the disciple Peter. We're going to pick up the story in Matthew chapter 14. Matthew chapter 14, if you look at it, it's a really interesting story, but it's probably one of the most emotional days of Jesus' life. So the chapter begins with Jesus being informed that John the Baptist had just been beheaded. So John was his cousin, and Jesus has been told that just died. So Jesus was looking to have some alone time. And off he goes to try and get alone time. And as he's going away to get alone time, people saw Jesus and they went to him. If you keep reading the chapter, it says that when Jesus saw the people, he had compassion on them. And instead of sending them away, that I need my quiet time, Jesus started teaching them. With his disciples, he started teaching them because he had compassion for them. And the story goes on that after teaching them, he fed the 5,000 that were there. 5,000 men, not including the women and children that are not counted there. So you can see the big day, big long day. John died, his alone time got interrupted, and now he's feeding 5,000 people. After feeding the 5,000 people, Jesus told his disciples, get in the boat and go across the lake. I'm going to dismiss the people and let them go, and then I'm going to spend some quiet time by myself and I'll come to you. His disciples hopped in a boat and went across the lake. As Jesus dismissed the people, he spent time by himself because he needed it. And this is so crucial and so important. Give me 5 more minutes. 5 more minutes. Okay. So Jesus went alone and he spent time with his Father. And the story picks up, says that as Jesus was spending time alone by himself, the disciples were struggling out in the lake because the winds and the waves started picking up and it got stronger and stronger. And the disciples are experienced fishermen. Some of them were experienced fishermen. And they were struggling. They were struggling big time. And it says that at about 3 o'clock in the morning, through the fog, through the storm, through the waves that were so high and so strong, the disciples saw a figure walking on the water towards them. And the story says that when they saw Jesus get closer and closer to them, they were terrified. That's the word that the Bible used, terrified. They were afraid. And they looked at each other and they said, it's a ghost. Now, I don't understand this because they spent all day with Jesus. They would have known what Jesus looked like. But they concluded that this is a ghost walking on water because they've not seen such a thing done before. And the disciples were amazed. This is a ghost. And Jesus, I love what Jesus says to them. He says, don't be afraid. I am here. Those were Jesus' words. And then Jesus gives instructions for their next step. He said to them, don't be afraid, for I am here. Take courage. That was Jesus' words to them. This is your next step. Take courage, because I'm here. Peter, without thinking, straight away jumps up and he says, if that's you, Lord, tell me to come to you on the water. And Jesus says, come. And Peter hopped out of the boat, stepped out of the boat onto the water, and he starts walking towards Jesus. This is exciting, isn't it? He starts walking towards Jesus. Unfortunately, it's not exciting because we know the story. As he's walking, he sees what was happening around him and he starts to sink. What I got out of that one was Peter. And this is a note for us. If you're going to ask Jesus to go on the journey with him, You better be prepared to walk by faith, not by sight. If you're asking Jesus, let's go on this journey, we better be prepared to walk by faith, not by sight. Because once Peter was out on the water, I could imagine him walking along the water. I don't know how many steps, because the Bible doesn't say how many steps he took. But he was walking towards Jesus. I could imagine him looking back at the disciples, and the disciples would have been high-fiving. Oh, look at that. That is so amazing. That is so cool. But once Peter stopped looking at the disciples, stopped looking at Jesus, and he turned around and he saw what was happening around him, fear started taking over. And all those steps that he took towards Jesus now sort of stopped because he started sinking. If you want to go on the journey with Jesus, let's walk by faith, not by sight. Because the more we see around us, and we do that now, the more we see that the world is deteriorating by the second. Take faith. Jesus says, you have little faith. He picks him up. Faith is so important to Jesus. He wants us to trust him because he's here. He wanted Peter, before he took the next step out of the boat, to know that Jesus is there. Amen? That's what Jesus wanted Peter to know. You know, another thing about Peter, not only did Jesus want him to step out to have faith in him, but here's another thing. If you want to experience Jesus, if you want to see Jesus do miracles and do awesome things, be prepared to step out of your comfort zone, like Peter did. Peter had the passion, but he didn't have the focus. Peter had the will to do things, but he didn't have the focus to stay on. So the lesson that I get from Peter is stay focused. Look towards Jesus. Jesus said, I'm here. Let's get out of the boat. Take our next step. So how do we, as people, what lessons can we learn, and how do we walk with God from those three stories? So here are the things that I want to show you. I don't know if okay. Number one, if you want to walk with God, if you want to know how to take the next step, cultivate a daily devotional practice. To walk with God, it is crucial to set aside regular time for prayer, reflection, and reading of the scriptures. Establishing a daily devotional practice allows us to connect with God and seek his guidance and wisdom. Choose a time and place where you can focus without distractions and use resources like devotionals, prayer journals to enrich your devotional time with God. Second one, engage in meaningful worship. I love our worship this morning. Thank you so much to the praise and worship team. Practicing in a faith or participating in a faith community worship service is an excellent way to connect with God. Attend church regularly. Join a small Bible study group. Worship creates an environment of praise, teaching, and fellowship, which deepens our understanding and our relationship with God. Thirdly is practice gratitude. Gratitude is a powerful tool for nurturing our walk with God. Take time each day to acknowledge and thank God for his blessings, both big and small. Maintain a gratitude journal. I journal. I have a new journal at home. It's my favorite football team. For those of you who follow AFL here, if you don't, I'll give you a team to follow. Please follow Sydney Swans. They are a good team. Okay, Emma, no, none of that. But have a journal. Maintain a gratitude journal, or simply make it a habit to express gratitude in your prayers. Recognizing God's goodness and faithfulness in your life will help you develop a grateful heart and cultivate a deeper appreciation of his presence. Fourthly, is seek spiritual guidance. Walking with God is not a solitary journey. It is essential to seek spiritual guidance from mentors, pastors, or trusted friends who can provide wisdom, accountability, and encouragement. Surround yourself with a community of believers who can support and challenge you in your faith journey. And lastly, embrace God's forgiveness and restoration. Because we know the story of Peter. I have Peter's disease, foot and mouth at times. I have passion, but sometimes I lack wisdom. But it's always good to embrace God's forgiveness and remember that God does not judge me and hold me because of my wrongdoing. He loves me and He doesn't leave me the way He's found me. He forgives me and He restores me. So let's embrace God's forgiveness and His restoration. And that, my friends, if you want to learn your next step, the power of your next step is walk closely with God. And He will give you directions. May God bless you, church.